The restaurant was one of those places where everything costs too much, and the lighting is just dim enough to make you feel sophisticated. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling and soft jazz played in the background. It was a Tuesday evening, and the place was about half full with the usual crowd of business people and couples celebrating something special. In the corner booth sat a man in an expensive suit. You could tell it was expensive because it fit him perfectly, the kind of suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His watch caught the light every time he moved his hand, and he moved his hand a lot, usually to wave someone over or point at something he didn't like. He was there with 3 other people from his office. They'd just closed some big deal, and he'd chosen this restaurant to celebrate. Or maybe to show off. It was hard to tell the difference with him. The waitress assigned to their table was a young woman who looked tired but kept a professional smile on her face. She'd been working there for about 3 months now, picking up as many shifts as she could. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. And right now that was what mattered. She approached the table with menus tucked under her arm and that practiced cheerfulness that service workers perfect over time. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Giovanni's. Can I start you off with something to drink? The man in the expensive suit didn't look up from his phone. He just held up one finger, making her wait while he finished typing something. His colleagues looked a bit uncomfortable, but nobody said anything. Finally, he glanced up, barely making eye contact. Water. Still, not sparkling. And make sure the glass is actually clean. Last time I was here, there were spots. Of course, sir. And for everyone else? She took the rest of the orders with that same patient smile, even though something in his tone had already set the mood for the evening. She'd dealt with difficult customers before. You just had to stay polite, do your job, and not take it personally. But this was going to be different. When she came back with the drinks, carefully arranged on a tray with the water glasses spotless, the man took his without a word of thanks. He lifted it to his lips, made a face, and then set it down hard enough that water sloshed onto the white tablecloth. This is room temperature. I said still water, not warm water. I'm sorry, sir. I'll bring you another with ice right away. You do that. She hurried back to the bar, feeling her cheeks burn. The bartender, an older guy who'd worked there for years, gave her a sympathetic look as he filled a fresh glass with ice water. Rough table? I've had worse, she lied, but she hadn't really. Because as the evening went on, it became clear that nothing she did was going to be good enough. When she brought the appetizers, he complained that his soup was too hot. Then 5 minutes later that it wasn't hot enough. When she brought bread, he sent it back because it wasn't warm enough. When she refilled water glasses, he told her she was hovering. When she gave them space, he snapped his fingers to get her attention like she was a dog. His colleagues shifted in their seats, looking anywhere but at him. One of the women at the table actually apologized quietly when she came by, but nobody told him to stop. The worst part was that he was getting louder. Other tables were starting to notice. An older couple 2 tables over kept glancing in their direction. A family with teenage kids looked uncomfortable. You know what your problem is? He said when she came to clear the appetizer plates. His voice carried across the restaurant. People like you just don't have any ambition, no drive. You're content to just coast through life serving other people. She felt something crack inside her chest, but she kept her face neutral. She'd learned how to do that too. Will there be anything else before your main courses, sir? Yeah, actually. He pushed back his chair and stood up, looking around the restaurant like he was about to make an announcement. Entertainment. This place charges what, $40-50 for a steak? We should get some entertainment with that. He gestured dramatically toward a corner of the restaurant where a beautiful grand piano sat. It was clearly antique, lovingly maintained with a polished black finish that reflected the chandelier light. On weekends, the restaurant hired a pianist to play during dinner service, but on weeknights it just sat there, elegant and silent. Somebody here must be able to play that thing, right? He looked around at the other diners, most of whom were trying very hard to ignore him. No, nobody. Then his eyes landed back on her and something mean flickered across his face. How about you, sweetheart? You must have some hidden talents, right? Or are you just good at carrying plates? The restaurant went very quiet. Even the jazz music seemed to fade into the background. She could feel every eye in the place on her. Her hands were shaking slightly as she set down her tray on a nearby service station. The owner, Giovanni, an elderly man who'd run this place for 30 years, had come out of the kitchen. He was watching her with concern, probably ready to step in and throw this guy out. But something in her had shifted. She was tired of being invisible, tired of being dismissed, tired of people assuming they knew her story just because of the uniform she wore. "I can play," she said quietly. The man laughed. It wasn't a nice laugh. It was the kind of laugh that says he thought he'd already won, that he was about to humiliate her even more and he was going to enjoy it. "Oh, this I've got to see. Go ahead, entertain us. Show us what you've got." She untied her apron slowly, folded it carefully, and set it on the service station. Her heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. She hadn't touched a piano in months, hadn't performed for anyone in even longer. But as she walked across that restaurant floor toward the piano, something old and familiar woke up inside her. Something she thought she'd lost. Something that this man, in all his arrogance and cruelty, had accidentally given back to her. She sat down at the bench, adjusted the height, and placed her hands on the keys, and then she began to play. The first notes that came from the piano weren't what anyone expected. They were soft at first, almost hesitant, like she was testing the instrument, getting a feel for it. The man in the expensive suit had settled back into his chair with a smug grin, ready to watch her fumble through some basic melody. His colleagues looked down at their plates, embarrassed for what they thought was about to happen. Then her fingers found their confidence. What came next wasn't some simple tune you'd hear in a hotel lobby. It was something powerful, something complex, the kind of music that requires years of training, thousands of hours of practice, the kind of skill you can't fake. Her hands moved across the keys with impossible speed, her fingers dancing through runs and trills that most people didn't even know a piano could make. The melody soared and dove, built up and broke down, told a story without a single word. The restaurant froze. A fork clattered onto a plate somewhere. Someone's wine glass stopped halfway to their mouth. The background jazz had been turned off completely. Nobody quite remembered when. The only sound in the entire place was the piano, and it filled every corner, every silence, every space between breaths. The man in the expensive suit wasn't smiling anymore. His face had gone pale, his mouth slightly open. He looked like someone had just pulled the ground out from under him. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at anyone. Her eyes were closed now, her whole body moving with the music. Her shoulders swayed, her head tilted, and something in her expression had changed completely. This wasn't the tired waitress who'd been taking orders and swallowing insults all evening. This was someone else entirely. Someone who belonged to the music, or maybe the music belonged to her. The piece she was playing was famous, the kind of thing music students spend years trying to master. Every pianist knows it. Every pianist respects how brutally difficult it is. And she was playing it from memory. Not a single mistake, not a moment of hesitation. An older woman at a nearby table had tears streaming down her face. A teenage girl had her phone out, recording. Her hands shaking so much the video was probably going to be shaky, but she couldn't stop filming. A businessman who'd been checking his emails had set his phone face down and was leaning forward, completely captivated. The owner, Giovanni, stood by the kitchen door with his hand over his mouth. He'd hired her 3 months ago because she'd needed a job, and he'd needed reliable help. She'd never mentioned anything about music. Never said a word about any of this. She transitioned into another piece, something slower but just as complex. This one was sadder somehow, more emotional. You could hear something in it, something personal. Like she was pouring everything she'd been holding inside into these keys. All the grief and struggle and quiet dignity she'd been carrying around. The man's colleagues had turned completely in their seats to watch. One of them, a woman in a navy blazer, had pulled out her phone too, not to record, but to search for something. Her eyes went wide as she found what she was looking for. She grabbed the man's arm and showed him the screen, whispering urgently. He looked at the phone, then at the woman playing piano, then back at the phone. The color that had drained from his face didn't come back. If anything, he looked worse. The music built to a crescendo, her hands flying across the entire range of the keyboard, filling the space with sound so rich and full, it felt like an entire orchestra was playing. Then it softened again, became gentle, almost like a lullaby, and finally, after what might have been 10 minutes but felt like both seconds and hours, she played the final notes. The silence that followed was heavy, thick. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then someone started clapping. The older woman with tears on her face. Then someone else joined in. Then another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was on their feet, applauding. Not polite golf claps, but real applause. The kind you hear at concert halls when someone has just done something extraordinary. People were wiping their eyes. Some were still recording. The teenage girl was texting frantically, probably telling everyone she knew what she'd just witnessed. The waitress opened her eyes slowly, like she was coming back from somewhere far away. She looked surprised, almost confused, like she'd forgotten where she was. She stood up from the piano bench, smoothed down her uniform, and gave a small, almost shy nod to the room. Giovanni rushed over and hugged her, saying something in Italian that nobody else could hear, but you could tell from his face it was something kind. She hugged him back, and for a moment she looked like she might cry, but she held it together. The man in the expensive suit was still sitting down. Everyone else in the restaurant was standing and clapping, but he was frozen in his seat, staring at nothing. The woman in the navy blazer was still holding her phone, and now she was showing it to the others at the table. They leaned in, reading whatever was on the screen, and their faces changed too. Shock, disbelief, shame. The waitress walked back toward their table, the applause still going on around her. She picked up her apron from the service station and tied it back on with steady hands. When she reached their booth, she had that same professional smile she'd been wearing all evening. "Your entrees should be ready in just a few minutes," she said quietly. Like nothing unusual had just happened. "Can I get anyone another drink while you wait?" Nobody at the table could speak. They just shook their heads. She nodded and turned to check on her other tables, stepping back into her role as seamlessly as she'd stepped out of it. But the restaurant wasn't going back to normal. People at other tables were talking excitedly, still recording, still searching things on their phones. The older woman came up to her and took both her hands, saying something tearful about how beautiful that was. Others wanted to shake her hand, to thank her, to ask questions. And the man in the expensive suit sat there watching it all, his celebration dinner forgotten, his big deal suddenly feeling very small, realizing that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life in front of a room full of witnesses and cameras. The woman in the navy blazer leaned across the table and said something to him, quietly but firmly. He nodded slowly, looking sick, because now he knew exactly who she was. And what he'd done. The woman in the navy blazer couldn't stay quiet anymore. She'd been the only one at that table who felt uncomfortable all evening, who'd cringed every time her colleague made another cruel comment. And now, watching him sit there in shocked silence, she felt something snap. "Do you have any idea who that is?" she said, her voice low but sharp. He shook his head slowly, still looking pale. She turned her phone around so the whole table could see. On the screen was an article from 3 years ago. The headline read something about a rising star in classical music, one of the most promising pianists of her generation. The photo showed the same woman but different. She was wearing an elegant black dress, standing on a stage with a full orchestra behind her, holding a bouquet of flowers, smiling. "That's her," the woman said. "She was principal pianist for one of the top symphony orchestras in the country. She's performed at some of the most prestigious concert halls in the world, Carnegie Hall, the Kennedy Center. There's a documentary about her on PBS. One of the other men at the table leaned in to look at the phone, scrolling through more articles. "Wait, I remember this. My wife watched that documentary. She talked about it for weeks." The woman kept scrolling, her finger moving fast. 3 years ago, her husband was diagnosed with ALS. You know what that is? It's that disease where you slowly lose control of all your muscles. There's no cure. It's brutal. She found another article and kept reading out loud, her voice getting more pointed with each sentence. She left the orchestra to take care of him full time. Gave up everything. Her career, her salary, her performances, everything. They burned through their savings, paying for care, for equipment, for treatments that might help. She sold their house. Sold her piano, can you imagine that? A concert pianist selling her own piano because she needed the money for her husband's medical bills. The silence at the table was suffocating now. The man in the expensive suit looked like he wanted to disappear into the leather booth. "He died 8 months ago," the woman continued, her voice softer now but no less intense. "And she's been working her way back, taking any job she could find to pay off what's left of the debt. That's why she's here. That's why she's serving tables." Around them, other diners were having similar conversations. Phones were out everywhere. People were reading articles, watching old performance videos, sharing information. The teenage girl who'd been recording had already posted the video on social media, and people were commenting faster than anyone could read. An older man 2 tables over stood up and walked over to the booth. He was distinguished-looking, silver hair, expensive but understated clothing. He stopped right next to their table and looked down at the man in the expensive suit. "I was at her final performance before she left the orchestra," he said quietly. "My wife and I had season tickets. When they announced she was leaving, half the audience was in tears. She gave a speech about love and sacrifice that I'll never forget." He paused, his jaw tight. "What you did tonight was disgraceful." He walked away before anyone could respond. The waitress came back with their entrees, balanced perfectly on her arm despite everything that had just happened. She set each plate down carefully, professionally, like she'd done 1,000 times before. "Please let me know if you need anything else," she said. The man finally found his voice. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I didn't." She looked at him directly for the first time since she'd sat down at the piano. Her expression wasn't angry. It wasn't triumphant. It was just tired. "You didn't need to know who I was," she said simply. "You should have treated me with respect anyway." Then she walked away to check on her other tables, leaving him sitting there with that truth hanging in the air. The woman in the navy blazer stood up, placed her napkin on the table and looked at her colleagues. "I'm leaving. I can't sit here anymore." She pulled out her wallet and put down several bills. "That should cover my portion and her tip." "A good tip." She left without another word. One of the other men at the table followed her out. That left just 2 of them, and neither seemed to know what to do. Meanwhile, the restaurant had transformed into something else entirely. Giovanni had started bringing out champagne, refusing to let anyone pay for it. "For celebration," he kept saying in his thick accent. "For joy. For music." People kept approaching the waitress. A woman who taught piano wanted to know if she gave lessons. A man who organized charity events wanted to book her for a fundraiser. Someone else just wanted to shake her hand and say thank you. The teenager with the phone came up to her looking nervous and excited. "I posted your video. I hope that's okay. It's already got like 10,000 views." The waitress looked surprised, then concerned. 10,000? More like 15 now. People are sharing it everywhere. By the time she checked on the booth again, only the man in the expensive suit was left. His colleagues had all gone. His celebration dinner sat mostly uneaten in front of him. He was staring at his phone, and from the look on his face, he was seeing the video too. Seeing himself in it. Seeing what he'd done through everyone else's eyes. He looked up when she approached. "How much do I owe you?" His voice was completely different now. Quiet. Ashamed. She pulled out the check from her apron and placed it on the table. He didn't look at it. Instead, he pulled out his wallet and placed 5 $100 bills on top of it. "It's too much," she said. "It's not enough." He stood up, couldn't quite meet her eyes. "I'm sorry. That's inadequate, I know, but I'm sorry." He left quickly and she stood there looking at the money. The check had been just over $100. He'd left 5 times that amount. Giovanni came over and put his hand on her shoulder. "You don't serve tables anymore," he said. "You play piano. I pay you what you're worth. We talk tomorrow about details, yes?" She looked at him, and this time the tears did come. Just a few, but they were there. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked gently. 3 months you work here, you never say nothing about this." "I needed to be someone else for a while," she said quietly. "Someone without a story. Someone ordinary." "Ah, my dear girl," Giovanni said, smiling sadly. "You could never be ordinary. Not even in an apron." Across the restaurant, phones continued to buzz and light up as the video spread. By morning, millions of people would see what happened that night. But right now, in this moment, she was just trying to process it all. Her hands were still trembling slightly from the performance. She hadn't played like that in so long, hadn't let herself feel that connection to the music. And now that she had, she realized how much she'd missed it, how much of herself she'd lost when she'd put it away. The restaurant slowly returned to normal, though people kept glancing at her, whispering. She finished her shift, collected her things, and walked out into the cool night air. She had no idea that her life was about to change completely, that by tomorrow the whole world would know her story. She woke up to her phone buzzing nonstop. At first she thought something was wrong. Nobody called this early unless it was an emergency, But when she picked up her phone, still half asleep, she saw it wasn't calls. It was notifications. Hundreds of them. Thousands. They kept coming so fast her phone couldn't keep up. Text messages from people she hadn't talked to in years. Emails flooding her inbox. Social media notifications that just kept scrolling and scrolling. Her phone was hot from working so hard. She sat up in bed, confused and a little scared. Then she opened one of the messages. It was from an old friend from the orchestra. "Oh my God, I just saw the video. Are you okay? Call me. What video?" She opened her social media and her breath caught in her throat. The video from last night had exploded. Not 10,000 views anymore. Not even 100,000. It was at 40 million views and climbing. 40 million people had watched her play piano while wearing a waitress uniform. The comments went on forever. People were crying. People were angry at the man who'd belittled her. People were sharing their own stories about being underestimated or dismissed. Someone had found her old performance videos and posted those too, side-by-side comparisons of her playing at Carnegie Hall in an evening gown versus playing at the restaurant in her uniform. News websites had picked up the story overnight. Concert pianist working as waitress silences rude. Customer with breathtaking performance. You won't believe what this waitress did when a wealthy man mocked her. Viral. Video shows why you should never judge. People. Her hands were shaking as she scrolled through it all. This was her life, her pain, her private story, suddenly everywhere. Everyone knew about her husband now. Everyone knew about the medical bills, the sacrifices, everything she'd been trying to keep private while she figured out how to rebuild. There was a knock at her apartment door. She threw on a robe and looked through the peephole. A man with a camera. A reporter. She didn't open the door. Her phone rang. A number she didn't recognize. She answered it cautiously. "Hello, this is calling from the symphony orchestra." The voice was warm, professional. "We've been trying to reach you. The director would very much like to speak with you about a guest performance." Before she could respond, another call came through. Then another. A concert hall. A music festival. A morning talk show wanted her to come on and tell her story. She felt overwhelmed, like she was drowning. This wasn't what she wanted. She just wanted to play piano again, quietly, on her own terms. Not like this. Not with the whole world watching, but it wasn't stopping. By noon, the video had 50 million views. News trucks were parked outside her apartment building. Giovanni called to tell her she didn't need to come in today, that he understood, that reporters were at the restaurant too asking questions. The man in the expensive suit was in the news too, but not in a good way. People had figured out who he was. His company's name was trending online, and not for reasons any company wants to trend. The comments about him were brutal. People were calling his behavior disgusting, entitled, cruel. His company released a statement that afternoon. Short, corporate, carefully worded. They were looking into the matter and did not condone that kind of behavior. By evening, there were reports that he'd been asked to resign. She didn't feel good about that. She hadn't wanted to ruin anyone's life. She just wanted him to stop being cruel. But the internet doesn't do things halfway. Once something goes viral, it takes on a life of its own. Her email inbox had become impossible to manage. But one email caught her attention. It was from a foundation that supported families dealing with ALS. They'd started a fundraiser to help her pay off the remaining medical debt. People were donating. A lot of people. She opened the fundraiser page and stared at the number. In less than 24 hours, strangers had donated over $200,000. The goal had been $50,000. They'd blown past it and kept going. The comments on the fundraiser made her cry, real heavy tears that she'd been holding back all morning. "My mom died of ALS. I know what you went through. You're a hero. Thank you for showing the world what real love looks like. You gave up everything for your husband. Let us give back to you." There were thousands of comments like that. People sharing their own stories of loss and caregiving. People who understood. People who saw her not as a viral video or a news story, but as a human being who'd been through something terrible and survived. Her phone rang again. This time she recognized the number. It was the director of her old orchestra. The one she'd left 3 years ago, she answered. "I've been trying to reach you all morning," he said. His voice was kind, the same way she remembered. "I saw the video. We all saw it. And I need you to know something. Your position was never filled. Not permanently. We've had guest performers, substitutes, but we never found anyone who could do what you did. What you still do, apparently." She couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight. "I know you've probably got 100 people calling you with offers right now," he continued. "But I want you to know that you have a home here. Whenever you're ready. If you're ready. No pressure. Just know that the door is open." After she hung up, she sat on her couch for a long time, just thinking. Her apartment was small, modest, filled with furniture from thrift stores and walls that needed painting. So different from the house she'd had before, the life she'd had before. But something had shifted. Not because of the video or the money or the attention. Those things felt surreal, overwhelming, almost like they were happening to someone else. What had shifted was inside her. Last night, when she'd sat down at that piano, something she'd thought was broken had turned out to just be sleeping. The music was still there. She was still there. Under all the grief and exhaustion and struggle, the person she'd been was still waiting. By the end of the week, the fundraiser had raised over $400,000, more than enough to pay off every remaining bill with extra left over. The foundation contacted her and asked what she wanted to do with the excess. She asked them to use it to help other caregivers, other families going through what she'd been through. Concert halls from 3 different states extended invitations. A recording company wanted to talk about an album. A publisher reached out about a book deal. Giovanni called to officially offer her a position as the restaurant's house pianist. Good pay, flexible hours, complete creative control over what she played. "You make my restaurant famous," he joked. "Least I can do is pay you properly." The video kept spreading. It had been shared in dozens of countries, translated into different languages. People in Japan were watching it. People in Brazil. People in Norway. Something about the story had touched a nerve everywhere. The idea that dignity and talent could be hiding anywhere. That the people we overlook might be extraordinary. But for her, sitting in her small apartment watching the sun set through the window, it was simpler than that. She'd spent 3 years being strong for someone else. Then she'd spent months just trying to survive. And last night, finally, she'd remembered who she was underneath all of that. She picked up her phone and scrolled through the messages until she found the one from the orchestra director. She hit reply and started typing. "I'd like to come back," she wrote. "When can we talk?" She pressed send before she could second-guess herself. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something that might have been hope. 6 months later, she stood backstage at the concert hall, wearing an elegant black dress and holding her hands together to keep them from shaking. Not from fear, exactly. More like anticipation, like her body remembered this feeling and was waking up to it again. Through the curtain, she could hear the audience settling into their seats. The murmur of conversation, programs rustling, the orchestra tuning their instruments, all the sounds she'd thought she'd never hear again from this side of the stage. The orchestra director found her in the wings. He smiled when he saw her. "Nervous?" "Terrified," she admitted. "Good. That means it matters." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "We're so glad you're back." She'd started rehearsing with the orchestra 2 months ago. At first, her fingers had been stiff, her timing off. She'd been frustrated with herself, angry that something that used to be so natural now took concentration. But slowly, rehearsal by rehearsal, it had come back. Muscle memory is a powerful thing. The other musicians had welcomed her like she'd never left. During her first rehearsal, when she'd finished playing through her piece, they'd all tap their bows on their music stands. That's how orchestra musicians applaud each other, and the sound had made her cry right there on stage. Tonight was her first performance back. They'd sold out every seat within hours of announcing it. Some people had bought tickets because they'd seen the video and were curious. Others were longtime classical music fans who remembered her from before. And some just wanted to support someone who'd been through hell and made it back. Giovanni was out there somewhere with his wife, wearing his best suit. He'd closed the restaurant for the night so all his staff could come. The teenage girl who'd recorded the original video had front row seats, a gift from the concert hall. The woman in the navy blazer had bought a ticket too, and had sent her a kind message wishing her well. She hadn't expected the man in the expensive suit to show up. But his assistant had called last week to request a ticket. Not front row, not anywhere visible. Back row, far corner. The request had surprised her, but she'd approved it. Everyone deserved a chance to witness beauty, even people who'd made mistakes. The lights in the concert hall dimmed. The audience quieted. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. This performance was dedicated to her husband. It said so in the program. She'd spent a long time thinking about whether to include that, whether she wanted something so personal to be so public. But in the end, she realized this was the right way to honor him. He'd always loved hearing her play. He'd sacrificed so much of his own dreams to support hers. The announcer's voice came through the speakers introducing her, and the audience applauded. She took a deep breath, smoothed her dress one last time, and walked onto the stage. The lights were bright and warm. The piano waited for her, lid raised, ready. She sat down at the bench, adjusted it slightly, and looked out at the audience. Somewhere in those rows of faces were people who'd watched her at her lowest moment, and now they were here to watch her rise again. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The piece she'd chosen was different from what she'd played at the restaurant. This one was about journey, about loss and finding your way back, about the way life breaks you apart and somehow, impossibly, you put yourself back together into something new. Her fingers moved across the keys with confidence now. All those hours of practice, all those years of training before that, they were all there in her hands. But there was something else too, something that hadn't been there before everything happened. Depth, understanding, the kind of emotional truth that you can only get from living through hard things. The music filled the concert hall, reaching every corner, every person. She let herself get lost in it the way she used to. Let it move through her instead of trying to control it. And something magical happened. The thing that only happens in the best performances. The boundary between the musician and the music disappeared. She wasn't playing the piano anymore. She was the music. When she finished, the silence lasted for 3 heartbeats. Then the audience erupted. Standing ovation before she'd even lifted her hands from the keys. The sound washed over her like a wave, and this time when the tears came, she let them fall. She stood and bowed, and the applause got louder. People were cheering. Someone threw flowers onto the stage. She bowed again, overwhelmed, grateful, alive. Backstage afterward, there was champagne and congratulations and so many people wanting to talk to her. But she found herself looking for one person in particular. He was standing apart from everyone else near the back exit. The man from the restaurant. He looked different. Thinner, maybe. Definitely more uncertain. When he saw her looking at him, he started to leave. "Wait," she called out. He stopped, turned back. Looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She walked over to him and they stood there awkwardly for a moment. Up close, she could see he had dark circles under his eyes. The expensive watch was gone. So was the arrogant posture. "Thank you for coming," she said. He looked surprised. "I didn't think you'd want me here." "I didn't know if I did either," she admitted. "But I'm glad you came." "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "I know I said that before, but I need to say it again. What I did to you was unforgivable. I was cruel for no reason except that I could be. And watching you tonight, seeing what you're capable of, what you've overcome." He trailed off, shook his head. "I'm just sorry." She looked at him for a long moment. "I forgive you," she said finally. "Not because what you did was okay. It wasn't. But because holding on to anger was making me heavy and I don't want to carry that weight anymore." He nodded, looking like he might cry. "I've been volunteering at a community center, working with kids, trying to be better than I was." "That's good," she said, and she meant it. He left shortly after that, slipping out the back exit into the night. She didn't know if she'd ever see him again, and she was okay with that. Forgiveness didn't mean friendship. It just meant letting go. Giovanni found her eventually, his face glowing with pride. "Bellissima. Perfect, you see? You always had this inside you. Even when you were carrying plates, you had this." "Thank you for giving me a place to land when I needed it," she said. "Ah, I do nothing. You do everything." The woman in the navy blazer came backstage too, and they hugged like old friends even though they'd only met that one terrible night. "You were magnificent," she said. "Absolutely magnificent." Later, after everyone had gone home and the concert hall was quiet, she stood alone on the empty stage one more time. The lights were off except for a single spotlight. Her shadow stretched long across the floor. She thought about her husband and how proud he would have been tonight. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, so confident and sure of her path. She thought about the woman she'd become, serving tables and swallowing her pride to survive. And she thought about who she was now, standing here having done the impossible. Having come back, life breaks everyone eventually. She knew that now. The question isn't whether you'll get broken. The question is what you do after. Whether you let the breaking destroy you or whether you use the broken pieces to build something new. She'd built something new, not the same as before. Better, actually. Stronger. More real. She turned off the spotlight and walked out of the concert hall into the cool night air. Tomorrow she'd perform again. And the day after that, building her life back one note at a time. But tonight she just wanted to go home, make some tea, and sit quietly with the knowledge that she'd made it through. That she'd survived the worst thing she could imagine and come out the other side still able to create beauty. And that was enough. More than enough. That was everything. A year after that night at the restaurant, she got a letter that changed everything again. It came in a plain envelope, handwritten address, no return label. Inside was a single page written in careful, slightly shaky handwriting. "Dear pianist," it began. "You don't know me, but I was in the restaurant that night. I was sitting 3 tables away from the man who was rude to you. I saw everything." She sat down at her kitchen table and kept reading. "I want you to know that watching you that night saved my life. I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. I had been planning to end things. I won't go into details, but I was in a very dark place. I'd lost my job, my marriage had fallen apart, and I felt completely worthless. I'd even written letters to my kids explaining why I couldn't go on." Her hand went to her mouth. "But then I saw you. I saw how that man treated you. And I saw how you handled it with such dignity. And then you played that piano. And it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. Here was someone who had every reason to be bitter and broken. And instead you created something magnificent. You reminded me that there's still beauty in the world. That difficult chapters don't have to be the end of the story." The letter went on. The woman had gone home that night and thrown away the letters. She'd called a crisis hotline, started therapy, slowly began putting her life back together. She'd gotten a new job, reconnected with her children, found a small apartment she could afford. "I'm not all the way better yet," the letter concluded, "but I'm here. I'm trying. And I wanted you to know that your music, your strength, your grace under pressure, it literally saved a life. Mine. Thank you for being exactly who you are. Exactly when I needed to see it. You are a light in this world." She read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. She had no way to write back. No name, no address. Just this anonymous confession from a stranger whose life had intersected with hers for one crucial moment. That letter sat on her refrigerator for months, held up with a magnet. On hard days when doubt crept in or exhaustion took over, she'd read it again and remember that her story mattered in ways she'd never know. The video from that night never really stopped circulating. Every few months it would resurface, shared by someone new who'd just discovered it. Each time a fresh wave of comments would appear. People sharing their own stories of struggle and resilience. People thanking her for inspiring them. People who'd been in service jobs and felt invisible. Telling her that seeing her honored this way made them feel seen. Teachers started using the video in their classrooms to talk about empathy and not judging people by their circumstances. A college professor wrote a paper about it for a sociology journal, analyzing how viral moments can shift cultural conversations about class and dignity. She got invited to speak at events, which surprised her. She was a musician, not a public speaker. But people wanted to hear her story in her own words, not filtered through news articles or social media posts. The first time she gave a talk, at a conference for caregivers, her hands shook the entire time. But when she finished, a man in the front row stood up with tears on his face and thanked her for putting words to what he'd been feeling while caring for his aging mother. Others surrounded her afterward, sharing their own stories, and she realized something important. Her experience wasn't unique. The details were hers, but the emotions, the struggle, the weight of sacrificing yourself for someone you love, that was universal. Giovanni's restaurant had become something of a landmark. Tour guides in the city actually included it in their routes now. "This is where that famous video was filmed," they'd say. Giovanni had framed a photo of her playing that night and hung it by the entrance. Underneath it, a small plaque read, "Where music reminded us to see each other clearly." She still played there sometimes once a month on Friday nights. It kept her grounded, reminded her where she'd been. Plus, she genuinely loved it. The intimate setting, the smell of Giovanni's cooking, the way regular customers would request their favorite pieces. The teenage girl who'd recorded the original video became a filmmaker. She'd been accepted to a prestigious film school and credited that night with showing her the power of capturing real human moments. They stayed in touch, meeting for coffee every few months. The woman in the navy blazer had become a real friend. She'd left the company where she'd worked with the man from that night and started her own consulting business focused on workplace culture and respect. They'd have lunch sometimes, and she'd tell stories about teaching executives how to treat people with dignity, regardless of their position. "You started something," she'd say. "People are actually paying attention now. Companies are training managers differently. It's a small shift, but it's happening." As for the man who'd started it all with his cruelty, she'd heard through various channels that his life had taken a different turn. He'd lost his high-powered job, but found work at a non-profit organization. Someone told her he'd become an advocate for service workers' rights, though he did it quietly, never trading on his connection to the viral story. She didn't know if his change was genuine or performative. She hoped it was real. Everyone deserved a chance at redemption, at becoming better than they'd been. Her own career had fully rebuilt itself, but differently than before. She still performed with the orchestra, still played at concert halls, but she also did things she'd never considered before. She played at hospitals for patients who couldn't leave their beds. She taught free classes at community centers. She performed at fundraisers for medical debt relief and caregiver support organizations. The fame from the video had given her a platform, and she'd decided to use it for more than just her own comeback. She'd learned too much about struggle to forget it now that things were better. One afternoon, she was playing at a children's hospital when a little girl, maybe 7 years old, bald from chemotherapy, asked her why she played piano. She thought about it for a moment. "Because music can hold things that words can't," she said finally. "Sadness and joy at the same time. Hope when things seem hopeless. It reminds us that we're not alone." The little girl nodded seriously, like she understood completely. She probably did. Kids going through hard things often understand more than adults give them credit for. That night, she got home and found another letter. Different handwriting this time, different story, same basic message. Someone whose life had been touched by that night, by her story, by the reminder that dignity and talent and worth aren't determined by circumstances or uniforms or bank accounts. She added it to a growing collection. She kept them all in a box in her closet. On the hardest days, when she missed her husband so much it physically hurt, when the weight of everything she'd been through threatened to crush her again, she'd open that box and read a few. They reminded her that her pain hadn't been pointless, that her choice to keep going, to play that piano, to reclaim her life, it had mattered beyond just her own survival. It had rippled outward in ways she'd never fully comprehend. That's the thing about being human, she'd learned. We're all connected in invisible ways. One moment of courage or kindness or beauty can touch dozens of lives. Hundreds. Thousands. Maybe more. She didn't play piano that night at the restaurant to change the world. She did it because something in her refused to stay small when challenged. Because the music was still there, waiting, but it had changed things anyway. Not everything. Not everywhere. But enough. For enough people. And isn't that all any of us can really hope for? To make our corner of the world a little better, a little kinder, a little more beautiful than we found it? She thought it probably was. And tomorrow she'd wake up and do it all again. Make music. Tell her story. Remind people through her existence that difficult endings can lead to unexpected new beginnings. One note at a time. One day at a time. One life touched at a time. It was enough. It would always be enough.